We're looking at the ethics of Jean-Paul Sartre, and he is an existentialist, and we're getting this material primarily from his work, Existentialism is a Humanism. You see the dates of his life there, and that puts World War II in the middle of his life. And that's a fairly significant thing to note. Sartre was a novelist as well as a philosopher. He was a cultural activist. He actually was a prisoner of war in World War II, as were many French people at the time. He is representative of existentialism, a much broader movement that was occurring in the 20th century and began in the 19th century. Now, there are various types of existentialism. It's not a well-defined school of philosophy, so there aren't any really clear-cut, specific tenets or principles that all of the existentialists affirm. There are some things that are going to be in common, but there are Christian existentialists like Kierkegaard. There are atheist existentialists more commonly, like the other French existentialist novelist Camus, like Nietzsche from the 19th century Germany. So there are various forms of existentialism. But even having said that, Sartre is trying to lay out some parameters for what he thinks existentialism is. And primarily for Sartre, existentialism is the idea that existence precedes essence. So we need to take a little time to make sure that we're clear on this, since this is a significant major idea. The idea is that first we exist, and then our nature, or essential attributes, if there are any, come about after we exist. So this is in opposition to a common idea from a theistic tradition, for example, that there are essences in God's mind, and that he uses those essences in order to create things, including humans. And so Sartre is saying, no, that's not the case. And since we have to begin with ourselves, we just find ourselves existing, we have to begin with the subjective experiences that we have, because there's nothing else to begin with. So some further concepts and ideas of existentialism for Sartre. Let's explain this maybe a little bit more clearly. Let's take this idea and develop it with the idea of artifacts. So suppose you are building something or making a sculpture or a painting. First, you have this idea in mind of what kind of sculpture you're going to make. So we could imagine maybe Michelangelo, he's making the statue of David. He has in mind a clear idea of what he wants to do. Then he creates the artifact, the statue, in order to conform with the idea that he has. Okay, that's kind of the opposite direction of existentialism. So this is a contrasting view, right? And if you have this approach, you have a standard of goodness, right? The artifact is good to the extent that it conforms to its essence. So a good sculptor is going to make sculptures that conform to their essences. You've seen a variety of busts and so forth. There's one of Lucille Ball that doesn't look at all like I'm assuming the person had in mind. So you can value an artifact according to whether or not it's conforming to the essence that it has. But existentialism says, when it comes to humans at least, there is no such thing as a human nature that we were designed to fulfill. Rather, we determine our nature, right? Our choices in life that we make, our actions that we take, that's what determines our nature according to existentialism. Now, we said this work is called Existentialism is a Humanism. So just a little bit on that. First of all, there is the idea, it's an atheistic premise. So God doesn't exist. We start kind of with that assumption. We're not going to worry about any arguments for or against that idea. But Sartre kind of starts with this view that God does not exist. And of course, if God doesn't exist, then we don't have an essence prior to our existence. So there is no standard human essence by which we have to measure up. So humans are nothing but what we make of ourselves. Individual humans are then responsible for the way they are, for what they are. We are, in some relevant, important aspect, self-created, we might say, Sartre says, right? We are radically free, right? We create our essence. We create the kind of choices we have, in fact, according to Sartre. And so for Sartre's view, when an individual makes a choice, they decide what humanity as a whole will be. So he has this kind of Kantian spirit that what you do is you're declaring the kind of person you want to be. And in doing so, you are also declaring the kind of people all humans should be like. Now, this isn't a strict moral principle that we're talking about here. He just says this is the way things are. So this is a relativistic view of morality. And Sartre claims that it matters whether or not God exists. So we have the presumption of atheism. And then, so this is unlike, say, the early ethics of Bertrand Russell, a prominent atheist during Sartre's time. He claimed that when it comes to ethics, if God does not exist, it really doesn't matter one way or the other. But Sartre says it does matter whether or not God exists. And he says if God does not exist, that means everything is permissible, right? Nothing is ruled out from the start because we create our own essence, right? There is no essence that we have to fulfill. And so in order to show this, he talks through some different examples on how we form our values. So he imagines a dilemma. So again, context, World War II, we have a son in France living with his mother. His mother needs him to take care of her, but yet his country needs him to try to free themselves from the Nazi German rule. And so he's got this dilemma. Does he stay with his mother, where it seems to be some moral pull to take care of his mother, but there also seems to be this moral pull to join the resistance and help his fellow countrymen. So what does he do? You know, how does he decide what to do? And Sartre says, look, it doesn't matter if you had an ethical system, that's not going to help in this difficult situation. And we all find ourselves in these kinds of situations from time to time. And Sartre argues that, look, a Kantian ethics that's supposed to be strict and give you very clear guidelines and rules, that's not going to help. A Christian morality isn't going to help because it's going to pull you in different directions, he argues. And even if you decide to seek counsel, you're making the choice whose counsel to seek, or if you seek counsel from multiple people, you still have to make the choice whose counsel to follow. And so we are in this situation where we have to come up with the moral answer on our own. We just have to create it. And that, in fact, that's a significant point, right? Moral values are created, according to Sartre. They're not discovered, they are created. Now, let's take that last point there and make sure we're clear on that and contrast it with the idea that there are objective moral values. So you might ask, is the objectivist in the same boat as the existentialist? You might listen to Sartre's example of the man questioning whether he should take care of his mother or join the resistance. And you might say, he's right. Christian ethics doesn't tell us, Kantian ethics doesn't tell us what to do. So the objectivist seems to be in the same boat. Now, I want to make it clear here, epistemologically speaking, he might be right. It may be very challenging to find what the truth is, what the value is that we should pursue. But we need to be clear that the objectivist is in a very different worldview, right? So this is an important distinction here, the way an objectivist would view the situation versus Sartre. Now, the objectivist doesn't necessarily have to say there's a clear-cut answer to everything, but the objectivist does believe that there's a right thing to do. And typically that right thing may be found. It can be discovered. Now, it's there. It could be hard to discover. So we might be in a situation like there was a very old now TV show called The Pretender, who was kind of like a spy, you know, a good spy, or like a Jason Bourne, who could pretend to be about anything he wanted to be. You have characters in fiction that can do this, and there are actually people who have done this in actuality, right? Somebody who pretends to be a physician or a pilot or an attorney, right? And plays the role, even though they've never gone to med school or law school or developed gone through the school to train to be a pilot. They fake it, right? And other people believe that they are a physician, an attorney, a pilot, whatever they might be pretending to be. And there's a reality, though, in this situation, right? There is a reality, even though it may be hard to figure out if somebody's really good at this, it may be hard to figure out whether they actually are a doctor or a pilot or an attorney because they fake it so well. There's going to be a truth in the matter. And the objectivist says that's what morality is like. Sartre says no, that there is no truth of the matter. We create our own truth. So that's a significant distinction. All right, let's talk a bit about the values of existentialism. So critics of relativism might say that, look, here's what's wrong with relativism. There's no basis for reform or progress in a culture. If everything is relative and we just make it what we want it to be, well, making it one way is no better than making it another way because there aren't any objective standards. So why not say, again, that a culture that endorses slavery, for example, wouldn't be any better or worse, obviously, than a culture that does not. Nazi Germany is no better or worse of a culture than the French culture of the time around World War II. That seems to be a significant problem. That's a problem that an objectivist might raise. Now, let's step back a bit and say, what are bases for judgment according to Sartre? There are a couple, not nearly the same as objectivism, but he would say, well, there are bases for judgment in matters of fact. So certainly he would say it's a fact that this man, we considered whether he should take care of his mother or join the resistance. It's a fact that he's in that situation, that his mother needs his help, that the resistance needs all the help they can get, right? So we shouldn't deceive ourselves about these matters of fact. And he says often people do so. They attempt to deceive themselves so that they make their choice more clear-cut by denying some truth that ought to be considered. Another basis for judgment is in matters of freedom. Sartre says we have to acknowledge that we are radically free, that we are the one taking responsibility for the way that we are. And we have to accept that and acknowledge that and live that out, to live that full life of freedom that is set before us. Now, a critic again might say, well, what's the basis of having these as values? You know, why should you say you need to acknowledge matters of fact instead of bury your head in the sand and just go one direction? Or why is freedom so important? Certainly, that might be a criticism that others would develop. Okay, so let's consider at last here, what are some examples of how this might go? So Sartre gives a couple examples. I'm not going to explain all the details here, but let's just imagine two different women in two different situations. Um, they both are in a relationship. Let's say they're both married, and one of them, they both are not really satisfied with the relationship in their marriage. Now, one woman chooses to sacrifice. So she's not going to follow, maybe she has a desire to be an artist and a desire to run off with another artist and develop her artistic skills. One woman chooses not to do that. She's not going to do that. She's going to stick with her husband and children, and she's going to make the best family that she can and sacrifice for their benefit. Another woman in the same kind of situation opts for passion. So she leaves the family and she does go pursue an artistic career with another artist. And so they leave and do so. Now, Sartre says, look, how should we judge these two individuals? Well, they're morally speaking, they're the same. They have recognized their situation. They have acknowledged to themselves the reality of the situation that they're in. And then they've made a decision and pursued that. Both of them are aiming at freedom. So neither is morally wrong in what they've done. Now, Sartre argues that if we reject the existence of God, we have to be relativists, right? Everything's permissible, but it is kind of a sophisticated relativism. We create values for all humans, right? So he has this Kantian spirit in the background where we are saying, so the woman who chooses to run off with the artist is saying that this is what humanity ought to be like me. These are the actions that I'm taking, and I think humans should be like this. So you not only making a decision for yourself, but you are kind of making a statement about what is good for humanity in your freedom. So we have, that's a little bit of a different kind of relativism than one might normally encounter.